Mexico, Venezuela, these were the powerhouses of Latin American oil production, a source of wealth, prosperity, and competition. Now, Venezuela is in crisis.
It's a failed state, and you can see it in its oil production numbers.
And Mexico is too hard to invest in.
You started to see a lot of these steep declines starting to take form in Mexico.
Now it's up to the next generation of oil countries, Colombia, Guyana, Brazil, and Argentina, to transform Latin America into a production powerhouse.
The most rapid growth is going to be in Brazil.
We've been in Colombia almost 37 years. It's the most underexplored, underdeveloped country in all of South America.
The third region I think that kind of stands out when you look at Latin America is Guyana.
Vaca Muerta is the biggest opportunity that Argentina has.
It's no longer if do you want to be involved in Vaca Muerta. Now the sense is you want to be involved in the Vaca Muerta. You've got to be there because it's an important play for the future.
And if a new quartet of oil giants will emerge or be toppled once again by political strife, corruption, and social unrest. Welcome to our Bloomberg special, Oil's Next Big Boom. I'm Alix. Over the next half hour, I will take you deep inside the oil world in South America to find the best fields and opportunities for homegrown companies, international oil giants, and investors. Latin America has long held some of the greatest promise and the most uncertainty. We can see that playing out right now in Argentina, where the political situation is evolving rapidly and the rules for businesses are changing day to day. It is a hot spot in a region that has the potential to alter the dynamics of the oil market forever and help push the region into an age of prosperity.
The no-go is Venezuela. Venezuela is a failed state. It's getting worse, and it's going to be very difficult to bring it back in any volumes.
Dan Yergin is the oil guru, an economic historian, author, speaker, and vice chairman of IHS Markit. He's followed energy his entire life.
It's not only oil production, but it's the collapse of the whole economy, electricity, water, everything else.
So if Venezuela is the no-go, where's the go right now?
The go now is Argentina, it's Brazil, it's Colombia, and it's a new big surprise, Guyana.
This project, is incredibly cost competitive.
Over the past 4 years, there have been a dozen discoveries off the coast of Guyana, and Maria Cortez, Latin American Research Director at WoodMac, is positive.
It was really being developed on the lower end of the cost cycle, and so from that perspective, from both a scale, but from a cost competitive perspective, it's a really attractive project.
Qatar Petroleum recently entered into an agreement with Total, while Exxon is partnering with Hess. It's made 3 major discoveries in 2019, which hold almost 800 million barrels of oil equivalent. First production will hit mid-2020.
This is a country that really wasn't on the radar 10 years ago, and it wasn't really until 2015 with the Liza discovery that this country really became quite relevant in Latin America, but now actually on a global scheme as well.
We believe that Brazil has the potential to be one of the largest contributors for non-OPEC production in the next 10 years.
High hopes for Decio Odone, head of Brazil's oil regulator. And a big change for Brazil, which was producing only 2 million barrels of oil a day 6 years ago.
After 2016, the government took a series of measures to attract foreign investors to work on those reserves, and success was enormous.
Brazil is obviously in a bit of a league of its own when you look at the pre-salt and the kind of well productivity and potential that you're seeing there. I think long term it's going to play a pivotal role in the region and really kind of global scene.
$155 billion was pumped into the oil sector since 2009, and WoodMac thinks $140 billion could be put to work over the next decade.
And since those very deep offshore reserves in what we call the pre-salt play, they need a long period to be developed, 4, 5, 6 years, 7 years sometimes. We expect production to grow after 2022-23.
Petrobras, the state-owned oil company, says it now has pre-salt break-evens below 40, compared with 60 for new projects in the Gulf of Mexico and 70 for West African deep water.
That's incredibly attractive. It's really just a matter of the timing of when those barrels hit the market.
Brazil has a lot to prove. It's fallen short of production estimates for years because of declines in pre-existing fields and outages. These pre-salt fields have to pump faster than that oil is disappearing. Citi thinks Brazil can produce 3.1 million barrels of oil a day in 2020, which would be the largest production growth outside OPEC Plus and U.S. shale.
We will see a completely different industry in Brazil in the next decade.
Others are sticking with Colombia, like Vicky Holub, CEO of Occidental.
We have been there operating and producing since the early 80s, and so I'd say that through all that time we've always had the support of the Colombia government. It's right now still our highest margin oil production.
Colombia is a commercially attractive place for companies to invest, but I just think that the scale is not quite there. Exploration is really quite limited, and the country's struggled to replace reserves.
Want shale outside the U.S.? Some say your only stop should be Vaca Muerta in Argentina.
Just about all the major energy companies now in the Vaca Muerta, where they were kind of hanging back before, they're more confident about it now and saying this is a growth area and we've got to be there too.
Exxon's doubling down with a 5-year plan to extract the equivalent of 55,000 barrels of crude and gas a day from Argentina's shale basin.
For Exxon, going to development, that only project would mean something like $800 million per year.
I mean, $800 million a year for Exxon is peanuts. So what do you do to help get more peanuts?
Yeah, with 6 peanuts of that per year,
How do you get your 6 peanuts?
We can feed ourselves very, very well.
Chevron took the plunge into Vaca Muerta in 2013 and is spending a portion of its shale capex in the region.
Last year, investment in Vaca Muerta was more than $4 billion. And I say we have to be cautious. This is a country that suffered a lot of swings in the last 50 years.
How big will it get? How quickly will it happen? Will the infrastructure and the whole system you need to develop it and bring it along, can it be something that can come along as quickly as the shale in the United States?
Latin America has produced over 78 billion barrels of oil over the past 39 years, and there are still 133 billion barrels of oil left in the ground just waiting to be produced. Coming up next, shale's big hope outside the U.S., Argentina.
When it comes to Argentina, they don't fall in love just about wine. They fell in love with the rock that we have.
Argentina has two things: economic instability and some of the best shale rock in the world.
Vaca Muerta is the biggest opportunity that Argentina has.
Miguel Galuccio knows a thing or two about Argentina. He worked his way up to president of integrated projects at Schlumberger to lead the Argentinian state-owned oil company YPF. He now heads Vista, the first independent oil company operating in Vaca Muerta.
We need this type of company, the company that are agile, the company that are innovative, the company that are entrepreneurial, fast mover, and Vista is the first of that kind. It's the first one that is taking that risk.
Vista IPO'd in Mexico through a special purpose acquisition company 2 years ago with backing from private equity giant Riverstone. It bought 4 blocks in the Neuquén Basin, which includes drilling rights to 134,000 acres in Vaca Muerta, the core of the shale oil window.
The reality is we have 400 wells that we can drill here and just take 150 wells in order to reach this fantastic growth. That gives you an idea of how rich this area is in terms of resources.
Vista recently listed on the New York Stock Exchange and is now the second biggest producer in Vaca Muerta, producing over 32,000 barrels of oil equivalent a day in just 16 months. The hope is that well performance speaks for itself.
Some of the wells that have come in this year from some private operators are producing twice at the rates of what they were producing 2 years ago. And so in a very short time span, really dramatically climbing up the learning curve.
Second month, the oil started to come up, and the performance of the well is still excellent, and the third month was amazing. Okay, we're still having the same performance, the same IP, less drop in pressure, and a fantastic oil production. So we're very happy.
It's not easy to be an entrepreneur in Argentina. A lot of problems start and stop with the economy.
We magically converted a surplus of $6 billion in the energy trade balance to a $7 billion deficit.
Energy Secretary Gustavo Lopetegui is trying to change that and turn a deficit into a $2 billion surplus by 2021. It's slow going. The government has a $56 billion loan from the IMF, and one way to help pay for it is a 10% export tax on all goods, including oil.
We hate that tax. We don't like that tax. But you know, when you have an accident, you go to the hospital and they do to you nasty things just to stay you alive, no? So there was no alternative.
I think in the next year it's very likely that we will start to export light crude oil from Vaca Muerta.
Vista exported a small cargo of light oil in June, and analysts say fuel exports could rise by 20% to $4.7 billion in 2020.
If we develop seriously Vaca Muerta, it will be to export what is produced, because actually today we produce the oil we consume.
One problem is a right of first refusal law, where producers are only allowed to export when there's excess oil the refiners don't need.
We need to free it up, and we need to move to a mindset where we said we have more than we need. We need to stimulate the system and the market in order to create a Vaca Muerta brand abroad.
Vaca Muerta has a long way to go to even get the infrastructure in place to export.
Who will help build infrastructure out to some of these more remote blocks outside of the core of where most of the activity has been, because that will ultimately really impact whether those blocks develop and whether this play really takes off the ground in a big way.
And that's an area where the government can help by attracting more oil majors.
They are very interested. They are all doing pilot projects, and some of them go to development.
Big oil companies like Shell and Total poured $13 billion into exploration over the past 8 years. And now Exxon just doubled down on Vaca Muerta with a 5-year plan to produce the equivalent of 55,000 barrels of crude and gas a day.
Last year, investment in Vaca Muerta was more than $4 billion. So investment in service companies, in infrastructure, practically we will have to build new cities if the potential we are exploiting.
Can you do that? Are you willing to do that?
Of course.
Can you afford it?
Well, if we are intelligent in the way that we manage our resources, there will be plenty of resources to do that.
Exxon is drilling 90 wells and building a production facility and infrastructure to connect the region to pipelines and refineries.
How much money do you think is going to come in over the next few years? What's your estimate?
I think that $4 billion could grow easily 10–15% per year. This is what we are talking with the main international companies and also the Argentinians.
If things go well, Exxon could increase its production equivalent to 75,000 barrels of oil and gas, and in some ways, it's cheaper than the Permian.
If you look at some of the recent transactions in the Permian, the entry costs there are incredibly high and very competitive. But in Vaca Muerta, those costs are much lower. It's a much lower cost of entry for companies. And so that will play a key role, I think, in attracting investors to the country.
ConocoPhillips is the latest major to buy into Vaca Muerta, signing a sales and purchase deal with Wintershall Dea, giving them exposure to 2 blocks in the Neuquén Basin. The hope is that U.S. E&Ps will be next.
If U.S. independent come to Argentina, they will add a lot, because we need this type of companies. We need more investment.
One big deterrent is the upcoming presidential elections.
I think that the main thing is political stability, that the rules that we establish are respected and continue.
Something that looks less likely after President Macri's crushing defeat in the August primaries. The government responded by freezing oil prices for 3 months, saying it was essential to preserve the supply of fuel to meet the basic needs of the population. That means oil companies are making around $40 a barrel, hard to cover cost and hard to grow, threatening to undo Macri's work to liberalize the energy market and an about-face from just months ago.
We are just in the beginning. We have not to ruin that.
Some say the government did just that. The question is, can it get any worse?
Ultimately, investors in Argentina just want to have line of sight to the regulatory environment.
The other fear is that Cristina Kirchner, former president and now on the VP ticket, comes back to power.
The industry is quite concerned with the potential result of a Kirchner election, especially with regards to the impact that that would have to, potentially bringing back any price controls or potentially capital controls.
Yo me siento obligada.
Something Kirchner did in 2011, gaining a reputation of turning Argentina into an investment pariah. President Macri reversed those capital controls in 2015, only to bring them back after the recent primaries.
The political climate is always a concern in Argentina. It's been, and I don't think that is going to change soon going forward.
Galluccio is considered the architect of Vaca Muerta. He ran YPF during Kirchner's presidency and was able to entice foreign investment into the oil play.
We basically realized that in order to develop Vaca Muerta, we need capital from abroad, that we need other companies.
Vista is now taking the government to court to avoid those prejudices which may impact the current operations and financials of Vista.
If Cristina Kirchner gets elected, I think she will do for Vaca Muerta what needs to be done. That is basically continue what we're doing and to accelerate. I think if Macri gets elected, is also will do that.
I would like to have the stability that Chile, Peru, even Colombia have achieved. And Vaca Muerta can play a big role in gaining that stability.
That stability just got harder.
Argentinians, it's very difficult for us to agree on something. But what has happened during the last 6 years is that politicians, communities, unions, companies have agreed that Vaca Muerta is a huge opportunity.
And for Vista and the government, it's not just about producing oil, it's about saving Argentina.
What is at stake is huge.
This is a play that could produce 1 million barrels of oil equivalent in the next 10 years.
It can change the whole economy of the country and can change people's life.
Can you get to $20 billion a year industry like agriculture?
I have no doubt.
Yeah? Can you get bigger?
I think we can go bigger.
How big?
I think we can double that.
Coming up, big money, big oil, big potential.
As people see the political difficulties in other regions of the world, they will start to migrate more to South America. We think the best place to find oil is when you're, standing in oil.
The risks to investing in Latin America are great. In Argentina, growth could contract over 1% this year. More and more people are living in poverty, and inflation continues to rise. And the state has a $56 billion loan from the IMF hanging over its head. Now, on to Brazil, which has problems of its own. President Jair Bolsonaro is trying to pass much-needed pension reform to save money over 10 years to combat rising public debt and slowing growth. Meanwhile, Colombia's oil production growth and reserves continue to stagnate as GDP slides to zero. And in Guyana, Exxon has made 13 discoveries since 2015 with more than 6 billion barrels of oil and gas, but it's still an unproven frontier with no track record of success. It is high risk and high reward.
While all our oil brothers are scrambling over every acre in North America and the Permian or whatever basin is hot, this whole southern continent has been left wide open.
James Park, founder and CEO of GeoPark, has invested $2.5 billion over 16 years in Latin America.
We really drew a basin map, sedimentary basin, hydrocarbon basins, proven basins where we knew the rocks had oil and gas and just hadn't been fully developed or explored. So we drew that map without any political boundaries.
GeoPark has over 1 billion barrels of exploration reserves all across Latin America, from Chile to Colombia and Peru to Argentina and Ecuador.
There's a lot of misconceptions about Latin America, particularly with respect to whether it's a welcoming or politically risky area.
And now the money is really flowing.
Vista has managed to channel a lot of investors from different parts of the world, from sovereign funds from Middle East, pension funds from Mexico, institutional investors from US, institutional investors from Canada, from Europe, family offices. So a big, broad range of investors.
What about China? Have you heard anything about China being interested in assets?
They have not yet shown interest in unconventional.
Do you expect them to?
I think at some point of time, China have a deficit in gas. So I think China sooner or later will get to unconventional, and they have a huge unconventional resource. So yes, I expect them to be a player at some point of time.
China's national energy companies will spend $10 billion of their upstream capex in South America over the next 5 years.
The Chinese, for instance, are partners with American companies in Guyana. What's needed for these big developments is capital, and the Chinese bring capital often as minority partners. So, I mean, I think they're going to be certainly going to be players there.
Another player is Saudi Arabia.
We are talking with them. Last year, I believe that was Vaca Muerta began to show that it's not a dream, but it can be a reality. Of course, we have reached 1,000 wells. That is nothing compared with the USA, but you know, it's the only place, apart from US and Canada, where unconventional oil and gas are produced in scale.
And then there's India.
We have a strategic alliance with India, the National Oil Company of India, which is the fastest growing consumer of oil, because they see Latin America as the best place to be looking for oil and gas.
And this kind of capital and dedication has the potential to add more low-cost oil to the market.
We have in Colombia $4 per barrel operating costs and IRRs on our wells of over 500%.
The region has a lot of remaining potential from an exploration perspective, and at the same time, in some of these more complex technical areas, such as deep water, operators have made a lot of advancements in terms of bringing the cost down, and so that's made this resource more competitive. So from a returns perspective, I think that Latin America remains a really attractive investment destination for international companies.
For decades, Saudi Arabia ruled the oil market with 266 billion barrels of low-cost reserves. The rise of cheap and quick-to-market U.S. shale oil changed some of Saudi's power, and now Latin America could do the same.
Over the last 10 years, actually, Latin America has added more new reserves and potential reserves than any other region in the world.
When you look at, non-OPEC production, especially places like Brazil and Guyana, these will really be, underpin a lot of that growth in the future.
And for analysts and producers, it's not if, but when.
So as people see the political difficulties in other regions of the world, as they see security issues, as they find the difficulty and the cost of going after hydrocarbons, they will start to migrate more to South America. These basins, they've maybe only gone through one cycle. People think that there's nothing left to be found. You can go in, new play type, new idea, new formation, and you find a lot of oil. So we think the best place to find oil is when you're, standing in oil.
So give me a really big picture here. So if I was going to talk about oil production, I start talking about the U.S., Russia, and Saudi Arabia. What do I talk about in 10 years from now?
Well, I think those still will be the big three, but we'll see other production, more diversification, more players. It changes the importance of Latin America. Obviously, Latin America has been historically a commodity exporter, and it will continue to be a commodity exporter. I think it will be an important factor in global markets, but it will be really important to Latin America itself in terms of bringing the revenues and spurring economic growth in those countries.
And the prize is access to one of the best resources on the planet and the potential to export hydrocarbons all over the world.